In the unforgiving archives of the Ice Age, a fallen king does not find peace. He becomes a battlefield. A proclamation that echoes across the tundra, inviting the Lords of the Dark to contest their rights of succession. Here, beneath the pale gaze of a winter sun, transforming a silent valley into an altar of necessary violence. Now, let the chronicle of this lost ruler begin. The wind howled across the vast white expanse, a mournful dirge that had played for millennia without pause. This was a world held in the grip of a relentless winter, where the frost bit deeper than any fang. In the center of a windswept valley, the snow was broken by a mountain of gray fur and cooling flesh. A Columbian mammoth, an elder statesman of the steppe, had finally succumbed to the weight of years. He lay on his side, a fallen monument to a fading era, his great tusks curving like unanswered prayers. But in this savage kingdom, there is no time for reverence. The heat leaking from the colossal carcass was a beacon, a signal fire burning in the sensory darkness. It carried a scent that cut through the biting cold, the scent of copper and rich, dense sustenance. For creatures lurking on the brink of existence, this is not just a tragedy, it is also a fortune. The fallen giant was a fortress of calories, a prize capable of sustaining a predator through the leanest months. Yet, such a prize could never be claimed without challenge. The silence of the valley was deceptive, a held breath before the scream. The scent had traveled miles on the gale, drifting into the hidden ravines and the dense pine forests, where the true powers of this epoch waited. The snow around the carcass remained pristine, white and untouched, but the peace was a fragile illusion. The stage had been set for the Red Feast, and the first of the contenders was already ghosting through the tree line, eyes fixed on the throne of flesh. He was the first to break the perimeter of the white silence. Emerging from the frost pines, not as a beast, but as a phantom materialized from the winter mist, the Smilodon fatalis. He did not scurry, nor did he prowl with the nervous energy of a scavenger, but he moved with the heavy, deliberate grace of a creature that has never known the need to flee. He was the assassin, the solitary lord of the ambush, and he approached the fallen mountain of flesh with the arrogance of an aristocrat arriving at a banquet. To understand this creature, one must look biology of the cat. He was not built for the marathon of the chase, but for the explosive violence of the grapple. His physique was a testament to raw power, shoulders thickened by dense muscle, and a frame stockier and heavier than any lion, designed to wrestle giants to the earth. But it was the weapons he carried that defined his reign. From his upper jaw descended two 7-inch daggers of serrated ivory, precision instruments too fragile for bone crunching, but perfect for the severance of arteries. He was a surgeon of slaughter, a master of the single, silencing stroke. He paused 20 paces from the carcass, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. The wind ruffled his tawny coat, but he stood statue still, a sentinel in the snow. Only the absolute certainty of his own lethality. He had claimed this prize by right of arrival, as a solitary claim staked in a land that rarely respected the rights of the individual. Satisfied that the stage was his alone, for the moment, the assassin closed the distance. He moved to the flank of the mammoth, the snow crunching softly under his massive paws. The heat radiating from the dead titan was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the biting chill. He lowered his great head, sniffing the wound that had ended the mammoth's life, perhaps acknowledging the work of the cold or illness, before turning to his own grim work. With a precise, practiced motion, he began to feed. It was not a frenzied tearing, but a systematic dismantling. He knew that time was a currency more valuable than the meat itself. The scent that had drawn him here was a siren song to every desperate hunger on the steppe. He ate with efficiency, his ears swiveling like radar dishes, tuning out the sound of his own chewing to listen for the discord in the wind. He was the master of the one-on-one confrontation, the king of the short, brutal skirmish. But the silence of the valley was beginning to fray. The wind shifted, carrying with it a new scent, musky, distinct, and multiplied. It was the smell of rivals who did not believe in the duel, but in the riot. The assassin paused, blood staining his muzzle, and lifted his head. A low rumble began in his chest, a vibration deep enough to be felt in the ground. He had claimed the throne, but he knew, with the ancient instinct of a ruler surrounded by usurpers, that the siege was about to begin. The solitude was over. The Legion was coming. The silence of the tundra did not break. It was dismantled, piece by piece, by a low, harmonized menace rising from the tree line. Shadows that detached themselves from the forest gloom with terrifying fluidity. One by one, they trotted into the clearing, their movements synchronized, their heads low, their eyes locked on the twin prizes of the valley, the dead mountain and the solitary cat. Enter the dire wolf! To mistake this creature for the modern timber wolf is to misunderstand the brutality of the Pleistocene. This was the fearsome dog, a creature forged in a crucible of constant warfare. heavier of bone and broader of chest than any descendant. Ventura. The dire wolf was not built for the graceful pursuit of fleet-footed deer. It was built to collide with megafauna. Their philosophy was not one of speed, but of attrition. They were the Legion, a brotherhood of soldiers who understood that while an individual might fall, the phalanx remains unbroken. The assassin atop the carcass stiffened, his hackles rising into a ridge of defiant gold. He hissed, a sound like escaping steam, flashing the ivory sabers that defined his rule. But the Legion was unimpressed by displays of individual vanity. They did not fear the duel, for they did not fight in duels. They fought a war of mathematics, and the calculation was simple. 1 king against 20 soldiers. They fanned out, a military maneuver executed without a spoken command. The pack encircled the kill zone, cutting off the Smilodon's avenues of retreat. The air filled with a cacophony of sound, snarls, yips, and deep, chest-rattling barks, designed to disorient and terrify. This was psychological siegecraft. They were testing the nerves of the assassin, prodding for weakness, waiting for the moment his vigilance faltered. A bold scout lunged forward, snapping jaws capable of shearing through bone, with a force that rivaled the hyena. The Smilodon swiped, a blur of heavy muscle and unsheathed claws, but the wolf danced back, just out of reach. It was a feint. From the rear, 2 more wolves surged in, nipping at the cattle's hamstrings. The Smilodon spun, roaring a challenge that shook the frost from the nearby scrub. But the wolves had already receded like a gray tide, only to be replaced by 3 more from the opposite flank. The dynamic of the valley had shifted irrevocably. The Smilodon was a creature of explosive power, possessed of a gas tank meant for seconds of violence, minutes of endurance. The wolves were engines of stamina. They were bleeding his energy, forcing him to spin, to lunge, and to waste his precious reserves on ghosts that vanished before his claws could connect. The Smilodon stood atop the mammoth's flank, panting now, his golden eyes darting wildly. He was the superior killer, the master of the lethal stroke. But he was trapped in a geometry of death he could not solve. The wolves tightened the noose, their confidence growing with every wasted swipe of the cat's paw. They were the encroaching chaos, the mob coming to tear down the aristocrat. The Red Feast had become a standoff, A tense negotiation of violence where the currency was flesh and blood. But just as the Legion prepared for the final, overwhelming wave, the ground beneath them trembled. The wind died, and the wolves, for the first time, fell silent. From the edge of the tree line, a darkness detached itself from the forest. Towering so high, it seemed to black out the pale winter sun. The Arctodus zymus. The giant, short-faced bears. If the Smilodon was a duelist and the wolves were soldiers, this creature was a natural disaster given flesh. He did not stalk. He did not organize. He simply arrived. Standing on all fours, the Arctodus zymus was already 6 feet high at the shoulder, as tall as an average man. His long limbs designed not for the lumbering gait of a grizzly, but for a relentless, pacing trot that could run down horses. But it was when he rose that the true scale of the nightmare was revealed. He reared up on hind legs, ascending to a staggering 12 feet. A tower of muscle and coarse fur that cast a long, jagged shadow over the frozen arena. This was the tyrant. His philosophy was simple. Might makes right, and size is the only law. The effect on the valley was immediate and catastrophic. The tactical grid the dire wolves had so carefully constructed shattered in an instant. A legion, faced with a god of the old world, broke formations. Their discipline evaporated into frantic yelps as they scattered before the advancing wall of fur. They were brave, but they were not suicidal. But the assassin upon the carcass held his ground. The Smilodon, fueled by the pride of the apex and the desperate hunger of the season, roared, a sound of defiance against the inevitable. He swiped at the air, his saber teeth glinting, warning the giant to keep its distance. It was a fatal miscalculation of physics. The tyrant did not negotiate. He dropped forward, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The impact was visceral. The bear swung a paw the size of a shield, a blow delivering enough force to crush a bison's spine. The Smilodon ducked, the wind of the strike ruffling his mane, and countered with a lightning-fast slash to the bear's muzzle. Blood sprayed onto the white snow, bright and starling. Pain, however, only served to wake the tyrant's fury. The bear roared, a sound that vibrated in the lungs of every living thing in the valley, and lunged. It was a chaotic brawl of fur and fang. The wolves, seeing the distraction, surged back in. Biting at the heels of the bear, desperate scavengers trying to steal scraps from the table of giants. The valley dissolved into a three-way war of attrition. The bear thrashed, throwing wolves aside like ragdolls with contemptuous ease. He turned his massive head and snapped at the Smilodon, forcing the cat to leap from the carcass to avoid being crushed. He circled, his chest heaving, his golden eyes burning with hate. But the throne was lost. The tyrant hauled himself atop the mammoth, claiming the high ground. He stood panting, bleeding from a dozen shallow nips, but utterly immovable. He looked down at the assassin and the legion with an imperious glare, daring them to ascend. The war was not won by speed, nor by numbers. It was won by the sheer, undeniable gravity of the monster. The carcass belonged to the tyrant. The short-faced bear, the undisputed monarch of this bloody afternoon, lowers his head to the prize. His feeding is not frantic like the wolves, nor surgical like the cat, but is methodical, a massive consumption of fuel required to stoke the furnace of his impossible biology. Around him, the hierarchy of the Ice Age rearranges itself in the shadows. The Smilodon, nursing his bruised pride and the ache in his flank, fades back into the mist. He is a king without a throne today, forced to retreat to the periphery to wait for another opportunity, another silence to break. The dire wolves, ever the pragmatists, do not leave. They circle at a respectful distance, curled in the snowdrifts like grey stones, waiting for the tyrant to have his fill. They know that even a god must eventually sleep. And when he does, the scraps of the Empire will belong to the Legion. Slowly, the adrenaline of the valley dissipates, replaced once more by the biting chill of the wind. The blood that sprayed so vividly across the pristine white is quickly cooled. The snow begins to fall harder. The red stains turn to pink, then white, erasing the evidence of the war. The carcass, once a mammoth, then a throne, is now merely a dwindling resource, a temporary reprieve in a world that promised nothing but the cold.
And so, the valley returns to the silence from which it was born.
These rulers, with their sabers of ivory and their hearts of fire, believed they battled for dominion. But they fought only for a moment's breath against the suffocating weight of time. The snow covers the victor and the vanquished alike, indifferent to their struggle, leaving us only the stones and the silence to remember the age when giants waged war for a kingdom of ice.